Very well, thank you very much. The theme or subject is somewhat complex. I would like to talk in detail, but I will try to describe the elements of the presentation somewhat briefly. I think it's important to have a general overview of the syndrome first and what it is. The first idea that I would like to point out is that when we talk about migration, we talk about social and demographic aspects and very little about the human aspect of migration. I tend to say that I don't know very much about migration, but I do know that we forget sometimes that there is an individual with his emotions and sufferings, and that's the angle in which we will be working today, and the human aspect or way. And it's true that we are in an era or a time in which we have to rehumanize the migration and take in consideration the individual or suspect. To migrate successfully, the Science magazine said recently that this is one of the characteristics that really distinguishes our species, which is the human species, and defines us as humans. And the Science magazine said that this is the reason why we've been so successful as a human species in the planet, because we are good immigrants, and we have also adapted to very harsh, extreme situations, snow, desert conditions. We have great skills to look into overcoming these situations, and we have acquired the skills. For example, the bird you see here can fly 11,000 miles in a migration, practically half a planet. There are species who fly 65,000 kilometers in a migration trip. Others fly in a height of 11,000. The migration is a very important aspect, part of the law, the migrating and the evolution. We have these bird who only weighs 3 grams, less than top of a soda can, but really he has that skill. And as human beings, we have the capacity of migrating. And if we see the last stages in history, we've seen 20 different species of different species who immigrated from Africa, and other close species who are very close to ours. For example, this gorilla is living through a grief. His offspring has died, and just as us, he's aware of the lost. As the primates are very much alike to us humans, very similar feelings, and you see him here, that he's in a philosophy Congress meeting, that's why he's so serious, but then on the other hand, he has a sense of humor, he likes those heavy jokes like us, and you know, they live in forest, but we have taken a backpack, and we are a very skilled species for long voyages in comparison with others who have migrated as well, but we have been able to explore and migrate even farther, and we are able to explore, and the human species really we have a physiology and anatomy that has helped us to migrate. As I've said, we are good immigrants, and if we see in a like a great city, New York or San Francisco, we see such multiple and variations of, and really diversity of people, Homo sapiens who lived in Africa, the genetics and the chromosomes and the DNA mitochondrial, that we all come from the same group. In a couple of years we have filled the planet, the history that it's really proper of migrations and the origin of migrations. And like a Spanish poet said, as human beings we do not have roots, but we do have feet that help us get to new horizons and to change. And we have here one of our ancestors, his we see there his footprint of him migrating from Africa, of the migrations and the voyages. And so the Moses and Abraham too were those who migrated within our civilization. However, in today's world, this migration would not be possible with that chromosome, meaning if we lived in a place in Africa like our ancestors, we would probably not be able to really migrate. I mean, meaning that migration has really changed recently. That's the paradox, that we are now in a world with great opportunities and great communication advances, and that for us to be unable to leave our place of origin without that suffering of migrating. And this is when the wall of Berlin fell. But now we are faced with so many walls in India, Bangladesh, Arabia Saudita, Thailand, and Malaysia. We have walls in different places in Europe between Turkey and Greece of 200 kilometers in the Ebron River. They're fortifying everything because they don't want people from Europe and Asia to migrate to their place. This is a world that we are facing, and people migrate because of the regimen. There are so many reasons why people migrate. Unfortunately, there are terrible situations that a lot are living while migrating. In the paradox, we see astronauts who are now traveling to the moon, and it's much more dangerous to cross a border than to go to the moon. And that's a paradox of the 21st century, that you see them in that space travel with a smile, but now really crossing a border is such a terrible situation. And so we are faced with the Ulyssess syndrome, that has been a recent syndrome that very well we have studied the migration theme for years. In the 80s, we had a center in Barcelona, and the comparison of the data that we had then with the data that we have now has really let us see into the differences. A book that we published with the investigation and data of that time, and things are now worse with all of the different walls and borders. Spain is a country that is faced with a lot of people who are migrating now. A lot of people from Spain have come to the U.S., and we also are seeing now a lot of people migrating in small boats and also migrating to the U.S., small children, the emotions, singing, everything that it involved. But when my uncles would migrate to the U.S., they had dreams, they had an illusion, they wanted really to progress. In Bilbao and Santander in the north of Spain, I have lived this situation where we've said our farewell to our relatives who have migrated to the U.S., but now we've seen how we have new immigrants or people who come in these small boats and are now arriving at Spain in the Canaries, the south of Spain. I've seen with my own eyes how people are arriving, and it really has nothing to do, not related to the migrations that we would see before, like my relatives when they migrated. Now we see ships being wrecked, we see people die, we see people losing their life, very terrible situations, really. Boats that are coming and very extreme situations. It's very different to migrate in a small boat than to migrate in a ship. In a small boat, you have very few possibilities of really surviving. These are pictures of the new migrations in Spain. People, ships being wrecked. You see now bodies of people there in the ocean, because of an immigrant who drowned. This is an image of what we are seeing in the last years, what's happening in our country. And here I'm sure that we are faced with similar situations. The border between Spain and Marruecos, an immigrant is being crucified, which is a symbol, of what's happening in the border. I would say that there are three great differences among the migrations that we studied 20 years ago and the present migrations. First of all, there is a family rupture that is going on, meaning that we are seeing men, women, children that are migrating alone. The whole family is not migrating. The entire family is not together during this migration as before. There are difficulties. Before there were difficulties, but now we have laws that forbid this. They forbid it. It is impossible. Secondly, we see millions of immigrants who are in a social exclusion. The structure, it's not that they have difficulties to progress, it's just that the way that the society has structured this is that they don't have a chance. And thirdly, something that was never seen in history, that migrating or immigrating is now unlawful, just as stealing. It's a crime. This is completely new. This is the situation in which we are now faced with the new migrations, and those who situation is somewhat now that their situation has changed, and others who are in process and then in the limbo, and then we have those millions and millions who are unfortunately with no documentation at all, to such point that those who are documented and who are the lowest level in the country in which they're migrating, now they're a group of aristocracy or a group that we might call such a really high-class group, because now the situation, the stressors, the dramatic situations that they're facing, that we see now, that the differences among even the own immigrants and the way they see each other with this dramatic situation. So in order for us to understand how this works, the psychological aspect and the psychoanalytical grievance, which I would say we are aware of, the stress, that situation that is far beyond of our control. When this is a prolonged stress, then to the point where it affects our own personality, we have to adapt. And so sometimes that's very difficult. Very relevant and intense